We should be live and ready to go. Over to you, Carrie.
Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on Memorial University's transit. My name is Carrie Claire Neal, and I am the alumni representative on Memorial's Board of Regents and a community member of the Memorial University Climate Action Coalition, which is hosting today's webinar. We are really excited to be organizing today's webinar with MUNSU's Liam O'Neill, MUN's Jordan Wright, and previous Board of Regents member Minister Sarah Stoodley to talk about their experience preparing for and working on the UPass consultations and what we can learn from them. We tried to do this event in March. This is our take 2, but there was a power outage, and then of course a pandemic happened. So we're really excited to be able to do this again and to such a broad audience here on Facebook and on WebEx. The Memorial University Climate Action Coalition is a collection of students, faculty, staff, and community members with the shared interest of pursuing climate action at Memorial University. The coalition was founded in September 2019 when we had that big climate strike with 5,000 people came out to demand climate action. And the first step of the coalition was creating the Memorial University Crisis Pledge. This crisis pledge was created so the university body will demonstrate that they are committed to fighting our current ecological crisis. And we're really excited to get so many senior administrations and unions on campus to sign on to that pledge. I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. I am speaking here today on the unceded ancestral lands of the Beothuk and Mi'kmaq of Newfoundland, and our provincial government continues to lay claim to the lands of the Innu and Inuit in Labrador. Colonialism continues to be a tool in the destruction of our environment and the genocide of Indigenous peoples here in Canada, and the violence that has been and continues to be enacted towards as evidenced in the poisoning of the Grand River in Labrador for a green mega dam, and the violence that has been and continues to be enacted towards Indigenous families through the residential school and currently through the foster care system. Our fight to stop climate change must include ending this violence and recognizing the self-determination of Indigenous nations and land back. I'm going to start today with a quick overview of the UPass consultations that took place at Memorial University, and then we are going to be hearing from our speakers to better understand the process that supported the consultations, what lessons we can learn from this experience, and what steps we can take going forward. We will also be taking questions and comments from the audience and want to hear from you on why you think the vote failed and what we can do to shape the consultation process going forward. So just a quick background on the UPass. In fall 2018, Memorial University hosted consultations on a universal transit pass, or a UPass program, to help students living in St. John's and surrounding municipalities travel between their home campus and around the area. A UPass is a discounted bus pass that gives eligible students unlimited access to all bus routes with expanded and enhanced service, so more runs on current routes and new routes. All full-time Memorial University undergraduate and graduate students registered in a given would be registered in a given semester at the St. John's campus, the Center of Nursing Studies, and Marine Institute. Students who meet the opt-out criteria, such as living a kilometer away from a bus route, taking all online classes, or with a medical condition that prevents them from taking the Metrobus, would be eligible to opt out of the program. The vote for the UPass took place in winter 2019, and if approved, the program would have begun this fall in 2020. But of course, with COVID and everyone taking classes online, that probably would have been delayed, but the UPass did not go ahead. Programs like the UPass are beneficial for our environment because the production of and emissions from single vehicles are a significant source of pollution in our city. To address the climate crisis, it is imperative that strategies are developed to effectively encourage people to use forms of active transportation, such as public transit. Currently, many people drive to Memorial University, and parking demand exceeds supply on campus, with students being the most underserviced group. Parking on campus costs an estimated $257 for each space each year and is subsidized with tuition and government grants. As offered in many major cities and universities across Canada, a UPass program relies on a high number of participants and can be offered at a discounted price compared to a student semester bus pass. Based on service levels and potential opt-out options, the cost of the UPass would range from $100 to $180 each semester, with ultimately a price point of $139 per fall-winter semester and $110 per spring and summer semester being proposed following student consultations. This is compared to the cost of a student semester pass from Metrobus, which is $280, and the cost of owning a vehicle, which is estimated at $800 a semester, plus either $12 if you get a parking pass from the lottery, or an estimated $450 for parking meters if you do not. The increased level of investment in the UPass means a higher level of service to and from the university and other locations of interest to students, as well as access to the entire public transit network, all for a reduced price. In winter 2019, the UPass was put up to a vote for full-time undergraduate and graduate students, with the vast majority, about 71%, ultimately voting against the initiative. Of the approximately 12,500 eligible voters, nearly 7,000 voted, which is a really high turnout for a student vote. So the students said loud and clear, we do not want this. And yet others, including myself and the Memorial University Climate Action Coalition, are continuing to advocate it. And today's webinar is about discussing why we think the vote failed and what we can learn from it. We are really lucky to have 3 speakers today who are involved in the UPass consultations at different levels, who are going to share with us their insights into the program. But first, we are going to do a quick audience poll to get a sense of who is in the room. So we want to know if you, how you identify as a transit user. Do you usually take the bus to Memorial? And how did you vote in the original UPass vote? So you should be able to see the poll there in your chat on the side. And we'll just give you a few minutes to fill that out. And for those who are watching on Facebook, if you, feel free to add to the chat how you identify and answer these questions.
We've got about 60% of responses in so far. We've got a few that haven't started. If anyone hasn't seen the polling option pop up, if you look, depending on your device, if you look in the bottom right-hand side, you should see a polling option that should open the poll for you. So we'll give everyone about 80% in. We've got one more minute on the count there, so maybe we can see if anyone is having trouble finding it. Give them one moment. Realizing that some that haven't completed are our panelists, so I think, yeah, there we go. About 20 seconds left on that, and then we'll show the results.
Perfect. Thanks, John.
Oh, it has it's counting down 10 seconds for anyone to finish answering. Okay. Here are our results.
Awesome. So it seems like we got a lot of community members and some students and faculty. Some people do take the bus, but the majority do not or live outside the area. And a lot of our attendees today did not get to vote in the UPass. It looks like maybe we have one person who did, who voted yes, and two that voted no. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on it when we get to the Q&A portion of that. And thank you all for participating in our poll. So now I'm going to turn it over to our speakers who are going to introduce themselves. So I'm just going to go in alphabetical order and start with Liam O'Neill.
Well, thank you very much. Just doing introductions then?
Yep.
Well, I guess I can say about myself that I'm a political science student, and I happen to be very passionate about transit, but I'm here today because I'm presently an arts representative on the board of the MUNSU Students Union.
Awesome. Thank you, Liam. And next, I will turn it over to Minister Sarah Stoodley.
Hello, I'm Sarah Stoodley. So I'm MHA from Mount Scio and a new minister. Just in case we come back, my role in the development of the UPass program was I was on the Board of Regents at the time before I was elected, and I was on a special transit subcommittee, and we looked at the UPass. I guess I'm looking at it from that perspective. I just want to give a shout out to Deputy Mayor O'Leary, who's on. Thank you for joining us, and one of my favorite constituents, Debbie. I won't say your last name in case you don't want me to identify you, but thank you very much for joining, and looking forward to this. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And next is Jordan.
Hi, Carrie. Thank you, and good evening, everyone joining us. My name is Jordan Wright. I am the Director of Operations, Conference and Event Services with Memorial University up at the Signal Hill campus. And I'll speak to it in a moment what my role was in the program, but at the time I was with the Associate Vice President Facilities Office and really had an oversight role over the development of the process and the program. So good evening, everyone, and look forward to chatting.
All right, thank you all. So now we're going to move into our questions. So the first question is, what was your role in the development of the UPass program? So Jordan's been around the longest, so we're going to start with him.
Thank you, Carrie. And yes, so it was quite the journey, I must say. And so my role, as I mentioned, I was with the Associate Vice President Facilities Office, and I had a fairly significant role in this process. And I was fortunate enough to share the experience with a fantastic team in our office. And our role was really to help facilitate the process. And I'm hoping to give you some more information to give you a sense of the effort that went behind the proposal that really spanned a few years. This was a couple of years in the making. And so initially I was involved with Memorial's Parking and Transportation Solutions Committee, which was formed in 2015, and I later co-chaired with MUNSU, which also included staff and students. And early days of that committee, we received 2 consultant reports where the UPass was referenced as a low-hanging fruit recommendation, if you will, to address parking and transportation challenges, particularly for students, as Carrie mentioned, as they have challenges finding parking and transportation options to campus. So from there, we decided to explore the UPass concept, given it was a recommendation, with a working group. And we had members of faculty, staff, students, our sustainability office at the time, Metrobus were also involved. And through that process, we really developed a number of options. And as we will probably explore here this evening, the options really are endless. And part of the challenge is to decide which one you're going to try and move forward with. So we did agree with our respective student unions and other stakeholders that we wanted to bring this to a decision point. And so our office and I was responsible with the team to plan and facilitate the consultation, to help with our communications team to develop an awareness building campaign, and to really facilitate the voting process, which was very new for the university. We also worked with a number of internal and external stakeholders like Metrobus and a number of municipalities in the area. So that all brought us to fall 2018. We had a couple of ideas to float within the university community, And so we started a consultation process, and we had over 100 people participate through sessions. We had over 2,000 students participate in an online questionnaire and survey that Carrie showed on the intro. And we also participated in student and family orientation. So it was quite wide and broad during the fall of 2018. From that exercise, we took back the results of our questionnaire. We took back the results of the in-person consultation and online questionnaires that we had. And we really honed in on modifying the model and modifying the program. And this was in collaboration with UPass, with Metrobus, in response to feedback that we received. And some of the great things that we heard, which really led to changes in the program. And this was one of the things I was pretty happy about, was that the options we put forward in the fall, we really came out with something that was a little bit different and a little bit of a hybrid of some of the options at the time in 2019. So we did things like focusing on reducing headways, or how long you have to wait between buses. We focused on specific areas that we wanted to see service improvements. As Carrie mentioned, this was about increasing and improving service to areas that students were interested in. We came up with the revised price point. Carrie mentioned that we had prices ranging from $100 to $180, and ultimately through the consultation, we heard that students were willing to pay a little bit more if the value was there, and that's what led us to the ultimate price point. And we had a discussion about opt-outs. We looked across the country at other UPass programs. We looked at our questionnaire to see what areas received greater than 50% support, and that's how we identified those. And really, as you go through this exercise, it really is that balance of price point, level of service, and opt-outs that you need to communicate and you need to understand as you build this program. So from there, we planned and executed the voting process online. We had a lot of collaboration from a lot of internal memorial units to help with that. And this was a new system that I'm sure might get revived again in the future. But there was a login with your MUN.ca. You could, we did a check-in with the banner student feed to assess eligibility. We had to, of course, work with our privacy office to assess anonymity and confidentiality. And we had to work with 3 different student unions to ensure that each group was represented. And so really, as I mentioned, the goal was to arrive at a decision, and we brought forward that information to the Board of Regents that Carrie mentioned a moment ago. And we really wanted to ensure through the process that students had access to information about the program and that they knew how and when to vote. Those were really our objectives going into the process in 2019, and it was about facilitating process. And based on our results, website and social media certainly had a lot of attention. We had a lot of engagement. And as Carrie mentioned, we had a great turnout, over 55%, almost 7,000 people voted. So it was great to see that level of engagement and excitement about the conversation and about the proposal. And yeah, so I think that summarizes my role sort of A to Z over a couple of years to help bring the concept to a proposal that ultimately students were able to express their opinion on.
Great, thank you so much, Jordan. Next, we're going to turn it to Sarah to learn about her role and the role of the Board of Regents in developing the UPass. Go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you, Carrie. So as I mentioned, I was on the Board of Regents and on a specific transportation subcommittee, and we worked with Jordan and his team very closely, I guess over maybe 6 or 8 months. And, throughout, different steps of the way as we were trying to figure out how, to get to that decision with Jordan's team. I guess one thing was really important was that we didn't want to, go through all the hassle of doing the referendum, I guess, or asking everyone if they wanted a UPass, if we didn't think they actually wanted it. So that's kind of where the consultation survey came in. And so in 2018, there was an online consultation survey to kind of gauge interest. And at the time, as a committee member, I thought that this would be a good representation of how students felt about the UPass program. So we had over 2,300 students, 2,300 respondents to the survey at the time. 1,800 of those were full or part-time students at St. John's or Marine Institute campuses. And so in that survey, students were, I just lost the sheet of papers. 62% of those respondents said they would pay $100 to $150 a semester for a UPass. So at the time, we thought, okay, wow, that's pretty good. This is something we think students are really, a a good portion of students would want, based on the fact that 2,300 filled out the survey. So, thinking back, I don't know if we would have kept going forward at the time if the consultation had come back and said, no, 71% don't want this. We probably would have stopped it then. But anyway, so we went forward, and but we did get clear direction from the students. And I guess so right now, my interest, so I'm MHA for Mount Scio, which the university is in, and I'm MHA for a lot of students who live around the university. So I guess primarily right now, I'm interested in, I'm happy to facilitate discussions, or if there's any small tweaks maybe we could make to the UPass program to kind of pragmatically work with different groups or stakeholders to get something in the works. I'm happy to play that role. But really, I guess just taking my knowledge and trying to see if there's anything that we can move forward, not really from an impartial perspective, but I guess in consultation with the provincial government, with my colleagues and the university, and there's Metrobus and the City of St. John's, and there's a lot of stakeholders, and especially, as Jordan mentioned, all the towns. And I guess just one other thing I would mention is that the Board of Regents has the power to implement new fees and new programs for memorial students. So technically, the university could have, or can in the future, whenever there's a UPass designed, the Board of Regents has the power to say, okay, here's this program, and everyone's going to pay $30 or $200 a semester for it. And so, we didn't, at the time, we didn't want to do that if the students didn't want it. So that's kind of where it died out, if you will, when the consultations, when the survey ended the way it did. So I guess, and we'll talk about it later tonight, but it'll be interesting to see, I guess, how we could move forward with that. But anyway, that's it for me. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we'll get some good insights on how we can move forward too. Thank you, Sarah. And next we'll hear from Liam and his role with MUNSU in the development of UPass.
Thanks, Carrie. So I really got thrown into this. I think maybe out of all the folks here, I might have had the most unique experience in getting involved here. In 2018, to some extent on a whim, and at the encouragement of some friends, I ran in a MUNSU election for one of the 5 executive director positions. And so that was my role at the time that this came forward. However, it had been in the works, as Jordan mentioned, for years before that. And so at that time, I ended up on the Parking and Transportation Solutions Committee with Jordan. And that was really where I began to learn about all, this proposal. I think like any student, I recognized there was a horrifyingly difficult problem with parking. I live in Conception Bay South, and at that time it was commuting every day to school. I would have loved to take the bus, and occasionally, I was able to get dropped off in Paradise and take the route from there out to MUN. But all in all, it's been a very lackluster system. So I was around during the consultations that happened. And I thought there was a lot of great stuff that came out of that. But as for the student union, despite members of the student union years before having raised the issues about parking, it wasn't really on the student union's radar leading up to things. In the fall of 2018, it sort of got back on our radar, but students weren't, unfortunately, in my mind, coming to us and asking for a UPass. They were complaining about parking, but they weren't putting forward a solution. I think the Board of Regents was absolutely right in identifying it as maybe the easiest or best solution, most manageable solution for parking. But this, on the student union, I feel like we really got hung up in the process. We were really concerned about the method of referenda, because each individual student union, of which there were 3 who would have been involved in this, the graduates, the undergraduates at St. John's, and the Marine Institute, each of them have their own referenda process. And so, we hadn't come up with any agreement necessarily to have one unifying referenda. And in fact, it kind of felt to us like it was going against the whole point of there being 3 separate student unions, whether or not you agree there should be. And so there were a lot of little things like that with the process, which really prevented it from being something that the student union grabbed onto and ran with, and took a strong position on. Really, what happened was the student union was looking at the plan and criticizing it. And frankly, as much as I think it was, I will say, and I'll elaborate this on more on this later, but I think that this process ended up being incredibly beneficial for students to become engaged in this conversation about how to solve MUN's transit problems. But as far as the consultations went, I thought there was a lot of great conversation, but by the time we had a proposal in front of us, we didn't have any more ability to go back and forth on it. And I think that that's something that we'll have a great discussion here tonight about what we can do now, given the situation that we're in. So thank you everyone for coming tonight, and I'll pass it back to Carrie.
Great, thank you so much, Liam. So now we're going to go into our second question, which is, what lessons can we learn from the consultations in the fall 2018? So this time we're going to start with Sarah.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. This is tricky. So I guess some lessons that I learned in the fall was, I guess, not to trust a consultation survey. Also, students love driving, more students than I thought. And university community, they love driving. They love driving and parking. And I guess just to clarify one thing, at the university, when I was on the board, we did vote so that all parking at the university is cost recovery. So other things like tuition and government subsidies, and none of that goes towards parking at MUN. That's why parking gets more and more expensive, because we made a decision that no other university funds could go towards parking. So it will get more and more expensive as parking gets, parking demands increase. But so students love driving, and I found it very challenging at the time because we had this vote, and then I think a few months later there was the climate march, which I participated in, and it was like, oh, if only everyone had voted, for to save the climate. I understand there were probably issues in the UPass, which turned a lot of people off, which I fully understand. But anyway, it's interesting. I'd be interested to know, I probably have this somewhere, but in other provinces and other universities where they have a similar program, I'd be interested in wondering if, was there a student vote, or was it student driven? Because I think, maybe if this was something where, say, MUNSU had taken the lead, although that's incredibly challenging, it's a huge amount of work, but if MUNSU had taken the lead and really worked with Metrobus and designed a program that they were happy with, maybe we would have been more successful. So it'd be interesting to see in other universities maybe who led it. Because I think maybe this is part of like the student administration battle, maybe because it was the Board of Regents, and I'm guilty of that at the time. We thought we were doing what, was, what students wanted, but obviously we were mistaken. So I guess those are the main lessons for me, but I certainly think there's a huge opportunity for improving transportation around the university and for students. Now, not so much with COVID, because fewer people are taking the bus, but now we have another 10,000 riders in St. John's, where everyone on income support has been given a free bus pass. So I'm not sure how that changes the mix, but it'd be interesting to see when Memorial St. John's campus looks like normal, and the Marine Institute and College North Atlantic, if maybe there's a revival in this conversation. But that's it for me. Those are my lessons learned.
Thank you, Sarah. And yeah, just to clarify, I guess, so the Facebook event refers to campus parking being subsidized by tuition government grants. That was based on information collected from the 2007 MUN campus plan and the 2017 commuting and parking strategy study. So I guess, Sarah, the vote, I think what happened is like the Board of Regents, when the students voted down the UPass, the Board of Regents made those changes with parking. Is that correct?
I'm not sure about the timing. I don't remember them being linked. I remember them being like completely separate, but that was, you know, as we were thinking about how do we do transportation and who pays for what, we certainly didn't want people who didn't drive to subsidize drivers, obviously, as a core philosophy. You know, a student who walks to MUNSU should not have to pay tuition towards a professor who drives. Absolutely, right? So I don't remember them being together. I remember them being separate discussions, but I'll certainly look at the timeline.
Cool, thank you. And so then next we are going to hear from Liam.
All right, thank you. Well, I think it'll be hard for me to go over all of the lessons that I felt I learned, because I think, you know, for me getting kind of just tossed into this, I learned a lot as I went, and I've thought a lot about it since. And I think that, you know, for anyone who participated in this process and was disappointed with the outcome, I think we can take some solace in the fact that there's immense learning opportunities that came from it. I think some of the lessons that are important to acknowledge before looking at how something can come about, something new can come about. One of them, and Sarah, I think you kind of are alluding to it there, is the unique car culture in Newfoundland and St. John's. And, you know, from my point of view, from the discussions I had with students, that had a lot to do. You know, yes, some people love to drive their cars, but it's also, I think what it comes down to is a lot about freedom. I don't have a car, and, you know, I often feel very unfree because of it. But I also think, you know, people, you know, there's sunk cost. If people buy a car, then they're going to be worried about paying more for something that they're probably not going to use. What are they going to do when, you know, the Metro bus is classically either not on time or not, you know, doesn't go where you want it to go. So what are you going to do if the bus doesn't work? You're going to need a car. And what are you going to do, you know, after midnight? What are you going to do, you know, whenever the bus is not the option? I think that's one of the really important things, because if you're going to get people to commit to a bus pass, they need to feel either like one of two things: either like the cost is not a barrier, or that the service will enable them to rely on it. And that's very, very difficult. You know, you often talk about the chicken and the egg problem with, you know, what comes first, more riders or better service. So that was one of the things that I really felt like was important, a lesson coming out of the vote. Another part was that was kind of the contentiousness of an opt-out. It's really complicated for students to like an opt-out process is inherently complicated. It's complicated for students to understand whether they'll be able to opt out. You know, if there was, I think going forward, if there was going to be another vote, one of the things that'd be very difficult, but I think would have helped a lot, inform a lot of students a lot better, is, you know, if there was a little widget they could type in their information into and determine, and they could get an answer as to whether or not they'd be able to opt out. Because I don't think most people know whether they're within a kilometer of a bus stop. Lots might, but, you know, especially if you're outside of the service area, but not if you're not if you live in town. And also, I wondered whether that's measured by like walking distance to a bus stop or as the eagle flies, because that's another thing. But regardless, I think that's a very important. It's very important to recognize the complexity of that. And I think then I guess maybe the biggest, or the part that I feel most strongly about as part of a lesson, you know, having been, you know, I think as MUNSU, we were one of like the core participants in the consultation process. We had meetings with Jordan and with MUN admin, and you know, I think they were very productive, but we were also like, we're kind of just confused off the get-go, I think, because probably for a lot of different reasons, but I think what I felt is that it was a top-down solution, and that's, you know, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that I would love to have a UPass here, but I think that for a UPass to succeed, there needs to be a critical mass of information, a critical mass of interest from the student body that has only begun to been created by this process. I try to look at it like this, you know, yeah, we had 70 odd percent vote against, but we have 30% of students that vote in favor. And I wasn't even able to vote because I was a part-time student at the time. And I thought that was a big missed opportunity. Like, as a part-time student, I still would have loved to been able to take the bus. So I think we need to build on that critical mass, and I think the way we do that is by having longer term grassroots level mobilization and consultation. It's, you know, it's great for the Board of Regents to go out and identify that this is, or for their consultants to identify that this is a relatively easy way to solve the transportation problem on campus, but I think that students need to come to that conclusion for themselves to some extent for them to buy into the idea.
Well put. Thank you, Liam. And next is Jordan.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you, Liam and Sarah, for giving me some more ideas. So first thing I'd say is what we learned from this process was the same thing many universities learned from the process, is this doesn't always work on the first try. So I think this is a perfectly natural, organic conversation that we're having here now, and a result that many institutions have faced after they tried to implement a UPass program. And in some cases, universities have tried for upwards of 20 or 22 years before they finally get a yes. So this is completely within the range of what other universities have experienced. And it speaks to some of the things that my colleagues here have talked about, that this is a long-term approach, and it's a shift that takes time, cooperation, multiple years. Even as you think about it, the program that was being consulted on in first 2015 wasn't voted on until 2019. And as you can imagine, sometimes when you're dealing with transition and turnover between some key stakeholders, that continuity is very important. And I think certainly that was part of the reason why we used a committee approach with our Parking and Transportation Solutions Committee, and sort of had staff and a team that tried to work it through the years and working with different stakeholders over that period of time. I would agree with Liam, what he just mentioned there about having a critical mass to advance the proposal. I think it's very important, and this is something that you see across the country. It's important to have strong student leadership champions and voice. And as Sarah mentioned, you know, timing is interesting and all the rest of it, but when you had this vote happen when it did in 2019, followed by certainly a lot of activity on the climate crisis and the pledge and the marches, and we now have a new sustainability and climate change office at the university. So a lot of things change pretty quickly, and I do agree that it's great to see now that we have the foundations of a movement, we have very strong support, and this is a conversation that's continuing after the result that we had. I would say that from an engagement and voting process, I think from the perspective of an individual involved in planning and executing it, I thought it worked very well from a process standpoint. We did our utmost to share information, to be at orientation, Monday mail, in-person, online, questionnaires. Participation was great, and even if you look at sort of statistical validity of responses, we were right up there with respect to our questionnaire, and we were blown away. I have to say that we had over 2,000 individuals respond, and we were told that that's more than most municipalities get on their surveys. And people often talk about Memorial University being a town within a town. Well, certainly the UPass conversation was a town within the town within the town. So that was great to see that level of engagement, and I must say, given the complexity of the voting process, and I know that Liam mentioned there was a lot of process questions. Honestly, everyone had the best of intent and tried to work together to make this work, and we talked about the different unions participating. The reality is, without the critical mass to do the chicken and egg that Liam talked about, we wouldn't have the revenue base to make those service improvements, and that takes the village, if you will. And so to implement a program without one of the unions would have looked very differently. And then you would have voted on something that was different than what you were going to be getting. So that is some of the challenges Liam mentioned, is that at some point you have to lock it in. And we had discussion and review and consultation over a couple of years with multiple stakeholders. And really in fall 2018, our effort was, we need to lock it in. We need to figure out what the proposal is going to be so that students can express themselves on this proposal. It is challenging to communicate the essence of the program. And so we had a lot of information. For anyone who hasn't looked, www.mun.ca/upass, to my knowledge, is still online. You can learn a lot about the program still from that website. But to boil it down to its essence of exactly what improvements there will be, exactly what the opt-outs are, exactly what the price point would be, because if you remember, we had different price points for different semesters, which was something we changed after the 2018 consultation. So that's, again, to me, it was very responsive to that voice we heard in 2018. But it is very challenging to communicate. So being able to clearly communicate the benefits and the essence of the program is something that we learned along the way. And we used a few infographics near the tail end of the information period that I think really helped. And I mentioned the challenge to coordinate among a number of different stakeholders and groups. And we did receive a lot of questions about, I'm a part-time student, why can't I participate? I'm a faculty member, why can't I participate? I'm a staff member, why can't I participate? I work at Eastern Health, why can't I participate? So as I just expressed, this was a multi-year, multi-stakeholder initiative. And we did go out and reach out to different groups along the parkway, if you will. And we did receive some interest, but as you can appreciate, it took Memorial staff, faculty, students a couple of years to get to a place where we were ready to make a decision. It wasn't a reasonable expectation that someone could hitch on and be at that same place. And some of the learnings that we received from across the country was that it's better to start small, get some success, get some wins, and build the program. And if you think about it, going back to the needs and the why, this was about improving accessibility and reducing parking and transit challenges for students on campus, while giving them access to the entire public transit network to more destinations because of the service improvements at a reduced price point. So if somebody in the community wanted to participate or wanted to get on the bus, there was no MUN bus specific for Memorial. It was the public transit network. And so community members could participate, and the discounted price was truly to benefit students who we thought were certainly, as you look across the country, a bit more price sensitive at that stage. So it was definitely something that was a student-first solution from that standpoint. And we did think that between the opt-out levels that we received, there would be an opportunity to add part-time students in after, but we needed to build on that success. And so that takes time, and you iterate and you increment and you improve. There are other locations like the College of North Atlantic on Prince Philip Drive that we also spoke with, but again, it was a little bit too late to come on at that stage. And so if this were to happen again, I think that's something certainly that broadening the scope at the outset could be helpful across institutions. However, I do caution that, as was mentioned, it was complicated enough to try and run it within Memorial, within a certain segment of students, but certainly there's a broader scope and audience for this. We did try and actually get into the classrooms in fall of 2018 in some political science classes to have debate and to have some idea exchange. We weren't able to execute that at the time, but we thought getting into classrooms would have been an interesting concept that I think it organically happened in a few areas, but that's something that I would recommend. And again, just clearly communicating the benefits. But really, I think the main lesson learned here was that it did raise awareness, as Liam said. An awful lot more people are familiar with the UPass now than they were before. And again, recognizing it's a multi-year initiative, the students who were voting on it in 2019 weren't necessarily the students who might avail of the service in 2020 or 2025. So working with an audience who's not quite your audience at the time of implementation is also a challenge. But overall, I think really there's a lot of good data, a lot of good awareness building activities that people can learn from for next time around. So thank you. That's my thoughts on lessons learned.
Great. Thank you so much, Jordan. I do hope that we are building a movement that is taking climate action seriously at Memorial University. And love the idea of a parkway pass if we can get there. So we're going to do a little poll for our audience. And we'd like to know, how would you rate these 5 lessons learned? See if it comes up here. And thank you all for adding your thoughts to the chat. We'll be reading those out with the Q&A portion.
My apologies. We'll be we'll live with that poll in about 30 seconds.
Great, thank you, John. Yeah, maybe in the meantime, I'll read out some of the comments that we've gotten so far. So Evan says, I'm a graduate student and I feel that you totally looked over us during the formation of the UPass program. There seemed to be no opt-out for us and we don't work hours that are suitable to take the bus. I don't know of any graduate student who voted yes. And Erica says, MUNSU had a successful vote on students paying to support students at risk. Wrights around the same time as the UPass failed. I don't think it's an issue with potential student support so much as with the process. Rather than bringing in consultants, let's support our student leadership. Love that, Erica. Thank you. Thank you both. And yeah, we'll do one more question, then hopefully we'll be able to turn it over to the audience to kind of hear your thoughts on the consultations and what we can do as our next steps. All right, so you should see a poll there on the side of your screen. How would you rate these 5 lessons learned? So you could say 1 to 10, and 10 being really good, 1 being really bad. And we will, for those who are watching on our live stream, you are welcome to share your thoughts as well. We'll even take qualitative responses if you want to give us we really like this, thumbs up, or there are some gaps missing, thumbs down. All right, and I guess while people are answering, maybe we'll move on to the next question. Our 3rd question for the night is, what do you think our next step should be to improve transit at Memorial University? So first we're going to start with Liam.
All right, well, I guess I'll start off with one thing that actually one of those questions or comments there made me think about. We're talking about student leadership when it comes to the I think they're referring to the student refugee program vote that was held, and I certainly feel I certainly regret that in my time on the executive at MUNSU during when all this was happening, that I wasn't able, for whatever reason, to play more of a leadership role in putting something forward. Like I think that there's a lot, like I think the student refugee program succeeded as well as it did because there were a lot of students involved in spreading the message and advocating for it. And I think that we need that kind of thing for a UPass to succeed. We need someone to identify to be able to talk to students about what they would want to see in a program, on an ongoing basis. And, and to a fair extent, that's why I've tried to stay involved in this conversation, is because I think that I think there's a lot of conversations that can and need to happen, to work on, growing that critical mass. I think going forward, like, Jordan and Sarah were alluding to, or talking about, the role that the student union has to play in this should be much more in building that critical mass rather than responding to it as a proposal. I think that, like, I absolutely think there are meaningful limitations on what the student union can do. I worked there for 2 years, and it's a big job, and sometimes you won't be able to do that. You certainly won't be able to do all the things you want to do. I learned that the hard way. But you need to, as an organization, it has the various student unions have some of the strongest ties to students to be able to build that critical mass, and that is absolutely integral. And to speak to Sarah's question about what happens in other cities, sometimes it is the university, sometimes it is the city, a lot of the times it is the student union that puts forward these proposals. I don't think I'd be very surprised if you'd see very many success stories where the student union isn't actively involved in building that critical mass. And it is complicated because we have 3 student unions. I think, looking back, if the 3 student unions had been able to sit down and say, okay, we agree that there should be one referenda, and we should work together on how that, and maybe work with the university, but work together to figure out what the terms of that would be, maybe that would have been valuable. But you have to accommodate the rationale for there being different student unions in that process. And lots of people said at the time that Marine Institute would absolutely not vote for this because they have such short programs. They all probably already have cars, this kind of thing. Like, they were very different, a very different user base. And so you have to be able to react. You have to be able to accommodate that kind of thing. But there does need to be a much bigger student union, I think, involvement. Otherwise, I already talked about kind of building on the grassroots part of the consultation, and I think that's definitely important going forward. But the other thing I'd kind of like to speak to is, I like Jordan was talking about how all the effort that Mom put into talking to potential partners, and we had some very good discussions at the time about the difficulties with getting the hospital or any other big group to buy in, and they want to see a success story, and which the students very well could be. But I think that is also a place where the city, as the owner of Metrobus, ought to be stepping in and maybe and I say this because I'm currently working on a group project in my policy analysis seminar on a policy proposal for the city of St. John's. But anyways, my idea is that the city should figure out a much more rigorous and meaningful way to develop these potential groups that could buy at a reduced cost. I think that there are many groups that would do this if they had the confidence in the system. Maybe some of them will need to see it be successful before they'll buy in, but I think if you can have these conversations, they take time, but I think if we can start these conversations now about how it could work to get either all the members of a union, of a public union, of government employees, at the other schools. I think one of the biggest missed opportunities is having high school students in the city bused on Metrobus. The government's already spending money on that. Why not teach kids from a young age to take the public transit? There's so many opportunities that one of the hesitations of students at the time was being the guinea pigs. As much we are the ones who need it most, arguably, but I do think that the city as the, you know, the director of Metrobus have the resources to be initiating these conversations that would bring dividends in terms of Metrobus funding in a shorter time than they might think.
Great, thank you, Liam. And next, we are going to hear from Jordan.
Thank you, Carrie, and great comments there, Liam. So about improving transit at Memorial, first thing I'll say is, because I think they deserve recognition, Metrobus have an amazing team, and they worked incredibly hard throughout this process and very supportive of our Parking Transportation Solutions Committee, as well as our team as we went through this proposal, meeting with student groups, communities, and Memorial administration to work through this process, and they were very responsive to a lot of changes. So they did extremely well to help us bring this forward and working within the environment that they have and the current budget that they have with the service that's possible. In terms of next steps, a few quick things from me. I think that working with the municipalities to improve surrounding and ancillary service is important. We tried to build some park and rides into the system. And the idea was that then further investments could come in years to follow to build the network within the communities. As we worked with our transit committee, we saw Paradise start a pilot project that has turned into a regular service now. And through investments in the UPass, it was able to further enhance that service. So I think that a lot of our municipal partners are interested in public transit, and I think that working with them to see what can be built over time is important. We've talked about it already, this being a culture change, and Liam brought it up there about working with the K-12 system. Once upon a time, Metrobus did have the contract, I believe, for the high school or the K-12 system. Again, there's public procurement around how that's administered now. But getting students comfortable with transit when they're coming to university, again, culture change, this takes time. There is opportunity to work with the College of North Atlantic in particular, a lot of the same needs and certainly similar geography. One thing that Metrobus told us, again, being very responsive, is that they do have funding every year to improve the network and to improve ancillary service. So they've encouraged the student unions, they've encouraged faculty and staff, if you know a location where you want to add a shelter, reach out to Metrobus. They have a budget every year to add more shelters. We heard that a lot, and we know the climate that we're living in. Improving bus shelters and snow clearing, they want to hear from you what matters. And unfortunately, sometimes it's not as easy as to say, well, I want one there. Sometimes when they go to explore the site, there might be an easement to deal with. There might be underground services that are a problem. So there's lots of complexity around where a shelter goes, but they do have funding and budget every year to make those incremental improvements. So adding shelters, improving snow clearing, these are things that we need to build confidence in the system. The UPass was available fall, winter at $139 a semester under the current proposal. Again, that can be revised to any price point based on any level of service, based on a given number of individuals participating in the program. There is currently a semester pass that's, yes, $275 or $280 now. Again, about twice as much as what the UPass proposal was, but it's still a great deal, and it's still a reduced price compared to buying your weekly passes or just riding at the daily fare. So I encourage people to get semester passes to try public transit. And really the main thing that I would say and agree is we're talking about change. We want to encourage people to use public transit, all the environmental benefits, all the benefits, again, of parking challenges that we experience on campus, but it also unlocks the whole network. It's not just about getting to and from your home and university. This is about potential for another employment opportunity, potential to see your friends, potential to go downtown, go to a shopping center, get a part-time job somewhere. This was about the whole public transit network. So think about that potential benefit as you weigh your transportation options. So those are some next steps for me. I'll pass it back to Carrie.
Great, thank you so much, Jordan. And last but not least, we'll have Sarah.
Thank you, Carrie. So I agree, with a lot of what Jordan and Liam said. I think in order for a future project to be really successful, yeah, it would either need to be student driven or, you know, have explicit students, you know, support. So I think that's a key thing that, you know, we missed before last time. And I guess the other big thing I would keep thinking about is what memorial class is going to look like after this. You know, right now they're doing mostly online classes now and in the winter semester. And so when I look at, you know, part of the program that we designed, or Jordan's team designed really with Metrobus, there was like a park and ride in Torbay, you know, a park and ride in Portugal Cove St. Phillips. I'm wondering, you know, next year this time, will we have as many students on campus as we did last year this time? I don't know. And will someone drive in from Torbay every day to go to class, or will they have an online option? I don't know. So I think part of this may change if classes don't return to the way they were last year. Maybe it's something different that we haven't thought of yet. Maybe it's like you have a choice between going in class or staying at home. But I think that's also will play into what a transit solution looks like. Just on the high school element, I know that the province is looking at that with the school district in terms of pilots for busing. So I believe, I don't know if it's actually, you know, it is something that's on the radar when we look at the cost of busing and how we get students everywhere. I believe there's a pilot in the works for one high school in St. John's. I'm not super familiar with that, but that is something that is on their radar, so don't worry. And then the other, I guess, big thing is there are a lot of federal government funding programs, which I've now learned a lot about. And those, I guess, require multi-year thought and multi-year planning, but there's a huge amount of federal government money available for things like improving transportation. And I know Metrobus does apply for a lot of them when they can. It might be an interesting angle of like student partnership with Metrobus. And, you know, maybe I'm happy to have, you know, liaise and have those conversations, you know, for a multi-year project with lots of federal government funding to improve Metrobus services for students. That's just something to think about. And I guess that's it for me, but I just wanted to thank Carrie and the others and John and Climate Action Committee for organizing this panel.
Great, and thank you for joining us, Sarah. And thank you all for your insightful view of the UPass program. It's really valuable to be able to do this debrief after the first round of consultations, especially with those who are directly involved in the program and putting it together. So I really appreciate you all taking the time to share your insights here tonight. So now we're going to turn it over to the audience to ask a question or share your thoughts. You are welcome to raise your hand and we will unmute you. So you can find that little raised hand icon under the participants. So if you haven't found that part yet, if you're as new to WebEx as I am, you can see in the kind of bottom corner, there's a little like human and that's your participants. So you can find the raise hand there. Or you can kind of just share your thoughts in the chat, as some people have already done. So you'll find there's a chat where you can send a question privately to the panelists, or you can send it to all the panelists. And we also have a Q&A section here. So I'll be reading from both of them. But if you send it privately, then I won't use your name. And if you shared it publicly, then I'll just use your first name just to, it's nice to kind of have a name to go with it, so it doesn't make it sound like I'm making it all up. We are also streaming live on Facebook and moderating questions there. If anyone would like to share any of your thoughts, we will be, you're welcome to put your question or comment in the comment section below the video. So I think I'll just read some of the questions and comments that we have so far. Someone said, it's strange to tell someone that they have to pay for something that they are not going to use or use enough to make sense in the name of betterment of society and environment when ... oil ... So thank you for that. And we also got another comment that it felt like a lot of ideas being brought forward by students were not heard or brought into the proposal.
I know I see David has raised his hand. Would you like
Okay.
to try unmuting?
Yes.
Great. David, you should be on.
Hi, folks. Hello.
Hello, sir.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to ask if if there's been any success. I guess this is mostly for Sarah in trying to rope either Eastern Health or the Confederation Building or both into the equation. Particularly thinking about Eastern Health because there are a lot of people who just have to get to and from there, and anything that improved Eastern Health, the Janeway and that whole area, anything that improved their access could be tied in very easily with improved access for MUN.
Sure. And Jordan might be able to talk to this from a stakeholder perspective, but I know that both were involved in the consultations. I had someone reach out to me a few months ago, and when we first started talking about this, and ask, did you think about Confederation Building? And I went and looked, and I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but at least it was like 60% or more bus routes now currently stop at Confederation Building. And so I guess it is relative, Confederation Building, Memorial, and Eastern Health are pretty well serviced. I take the bus regularly from MUN to Confederation Building. It's really easy, but that's just a very small route there. But I guess the biggest change we've done recently, like I mentioned earlier, is the income support change. So, we do have 10,000 more riders now than we did 2 months ago. So it'd be interesting to see what the uptake is, how many, what that usage looks like in a few months, and whether or not the extra money that we're investing, essentially 10,000 more passes at a reduced rate, whether that enables Metrobus to increase services. I think part of the problem with Confederation Building and Eastern Health is they all drive, and they, a lot of them have families, and I'm not sure we could convince many of them not to drive anymore. A lot of them, a lot of them are my constituents, saying when I knocked on their door, I know this is a bit of a tangent, but I'm really concerned about building the mental health facility on the floodplain. And so when people at the door would ask me, what do you care about? I would say, that's what I care. That's one of the 2 or 3 things I care about. And they would look at me and say, oh, I don't really care about that. I want to be able to, I'm worried about where I'm going to park when I drive to work at Eastern Health. That's what house after house after house, they told me they were worried about getting to work and parking. So I guess I struggle from a philosophical, is it what I want, is what my constituents want. But so I think it is a culture change, and I think more discussion is required. It's interesting.
If I could come back on that, like an obvious solution to the parking problem in Eastern Health is to get more people to not drive in. But I'm not thinking so much about the staff there, although they're an important element, but about people who need to come in and out of that area as patients who have a different demographic. And also thinking about the same kind of bundling and incentives that we're talking about with UPass could be applied to either of those sectors. If, for example, as a Eastern Health staffer, were willing to give up your parking space, we could give you a bus pass and $500. I don't know. Those kinds of things would be possible if people were willing to consider it.
I think if I'll just chime in there for a moment, and David, it's nice to hear from you. Through this process, as Sarah mentioned, we did work with Eastern Health, provincial government, as well as College North Atlantic. As I mentioned, it was a real catch-up effort, as we were a couple of years ahead of everybody in that conversation. And as you looked across the units, as we just expressed, some of the needs really varied depending on the groups you were talking about. Employees, similar to when we're talking about Memorial University, have different needs than student groups. Patients have different needs from the staff over at Eastern Health. And certainly as the college also has students, they were the most readily comparable, if you will. So I think each group was open to the principle and the concept, and obviously there were some other projects underway, as Sarah mentioned there, about the facilities and a new parking garage going up. But I think really, as we focused on this particular project, we looked again to the challenges we were having specific to campus and first and foremost for students. But we always thought this was something that over time we would see changes in the network. We would see changes at these other locations. and students being our leaders and innovators of tomorrow, we thought, again, similar to what we talked about starting at an early age with K-12 a moment ago, we thought this was an excellent point to try and introduce a concept like you've seen across the country to address a challenge. But I definitely think there's potential for those other locations, and there was conversation, there remains to be conversation, there still is, and we have looked at funding opportunities even for a transit terminal as an example. So these are all things that they were partners on the Mount Area Traffic Study, all aware of the recommendations, and certainly they're active in conversation still. It just takes time.
All right, thank you all. That was a really great question. Thank you, David. We got another question for Liam and MUNSU. Can or does MUNSU have multi-year projects or goals? For example, if the executive decides this year they want to work moving forward with UPass, then there's a new executive next year who aren't interested or have different priorities. What happens to the UPass plan? I feel like it is difficult to have multi-year consultation or plan if the student union doesn't have continuity year over year.
That is a wonderful question. Painful to listen to, but wonderful question. I think what I learned in my time working at MUNSU is that as a student organization that takes on so much responsibility, one of its biggest hurdles, especially with single year terms, is time. It's turnover. It's maintaining any kind of goals over a long term. Absolutely, there are methods for doing so. If the board of directors of MUNSU, because MUNSU is more than just its executive, if the board of directors of MUNSU vote to do something, they can attach it to be a long-term goal. Absolutely. Frankly, I wish our board of directors sometimes was more engaged with these kind of topics and we're putting forward more of that. And that's something that I might work on this year, given that I am now just an arts director. But there's a lot to be done there when it comes to organizationally having more capacity to take on those things. As students, we often come into the roles with very few skills, and I will tell you now, I was not qualified in any way for either of the two positions that I had. I learned as I went. I benefited far more from the position than I would say MUNSU did, in terms of the skills that I gained from it or realized that I needed to learn. So it absolutely it's a possibility, and I hope that it becomes more of a reality. And I will certainly do my best to encourage, where I can for that long-term vision, long-term planning to become more of a part of its organization.
If I can just comment there for a moment, I think first of all I'll say Liam's selling himself short, because he brought an awful lot of passion and perspective to the conversation, and it was wonderful when Liam joined the Parking Transportation Solutions Committee. He was very engaged, and anyway, so he's selling himself short on that one. But I will say to the person who provided that comment, that is something that we acknowledge as we partnered on this, and that I do believe is part of the rationale why staff and administration took on a bit more of an active role to help facilitate the process. If you think back to how it all started, there was a letter that came across to one of our vice president's desks back in 2014, I believe it was, concerned about the core science facility, that we were losing all this parking, and students were already faced with challenges accessing campus, and we needed to form a collective to address these challenges. That was the genesis of the Parking Transportation Solutions Committee. And as this commenter mentioned, that was the group in 2014, and we tried to preserve that vision and bring it forward. And when you do have some reports and recommendations, and working with a working group sometimes can take 6 months to bring these ideas to the next stage, and then you have turnover, as Liam indicated, you need some of that continuity. And we certainly benefited from MUNSU and GSU staff involvement in MISU as well, to help preserve some of that continuity, and us as staff as well. So certainly we recognize it, but this really was about partnering, and we tried to work together with everyone to bridge some of those challenges as we brought the idea forward.
All right, thank you both. Another question we got is, why was the process so slow to start, but so rushed towards the last few months heading up to the vote? It seems like there was a huge push to get it done quickly versus fix a lot of the problems noted. I don't know if anyone wants to jump in on that one.
I of course have a comment. So as I said, the discussion was really ongoing since 2015 or 16. And to be quite honest, there were certainly, for those of us who were involved over a number of years, there was certainly a concern that we were going around in circles, that we were talking about the same things. We were talking about, should we expand this thing? Should we make it this price? Should we make it this service area? Finally, we said we need to bring this to a decision to let us move forward and to bring us to a day like today. And so the decision was taken just before summer, actually in 2018, and we agreed with the Students' Union at the time that during the current term of everybody around the table, we were going to bring this to a decision. And over the summer months, we were able to bring on some resources to help us gear up, and we dedicated a few months over the fall to do a consultation to return the results of that. And truly, we did modify the proposal based on the feedback of that questionnaire and of the opinions we heard. We added a third semester to the pricing. The price point changed. Some communities were added. Some communities were removed from the initial proposal. The service area changed, and the opt-out categories changed. So with this proposal, the challenge is locking it in, as I said earlier. And so at some point, everyone will continue to have broad opinion and diverse opinion, and not everybody's going to agree with what the proposal is going to look like. We have to do your best to come to some level of consensus or agreement, put it forward for a decision or for opinion, which is what happened. And we moved it forward in time during the winter semester. So I certainly apologize if it felt rushed that way, but I can guarantee that there was long nights and long weekends spent to bring this together for the fall. Over a number of years, the consultation started, and really it was to bring it to a decision. But the wonderful thing is, as we talked about earlier, this is about moving forward. This is about lessons learned. We've learned from this last experience. We can take all of that data, we can take all of that proposal and say, what do we like, what do we not like, and how might we do it differently next time? And so that conversation can resume and engage as it is this evening, and bring it forward for another decision at the appropriate time, brought forward by the appropriate individuals. So yes, at some point you had to call it and say, let's make a decision on this one. But certainly we're here this evening continuing that conversation. So I think really, the saga continues, if you will.
I'd just love to add to that just a little bit. I think the other component was that Metrobus needed like a pretty long lead up time because they were going to buy more buses. And, some of the towns were going to build bus shelters, right? And so in order to, we had a target launch date, it was this fall, I guess. And so we had essentially a deadline for Metrobus. Well, we need to know by this date so that we can order new buses, essentially. So I guess that's another consideration as well. Is like, whatever infrastructure you need in place, the decision has to be made with enough time so that everything is kind of in order. But apologies. I echo what Jordan said, and apologies if it felt like it was too short.
Not to spend too much time on this question, but I do want to add something because I appreciate what both Sarah and Jordan are saying there, and I wonder if Jordan might remember late into the process. I don't know if it was December or January when we were finally getting the details of the plan. I got rather critical of different things that I found in it, and I kind of said I felt like it was going too fast, and with that said, we could have stopped there and tried to put lots of time and effort into perfecting a proposal, and that might have worked, maybe. But to the point about turnover and the issues with that, there was probably just as much or greater a chance that it would I happened to run again, but there was I'm only one of those student union folks, so it might have just been the same thing where they had to restart a bunch of a bunch of relationships, and there would have been no guarantee, I suspect, that that support would have been maintained. And I think that regardless of whether we could have came up with a proposal that was perfect, which doesn't exist, but it is supposing. At the very least, we are here now today, like you said, because there was a vote on it, and now everyone knows about it. And I think that that's made me feel a lot better about the situation. I imagine the same could be said by Jordan and Sarah.
Great, thank you all. I'm just going to quickly read a few comments. One person said, after the winter last year and the city's disappointing decision to vote down the snow clearing proposal, it's going to be tough to convince new users to try the bus with the fear of walking on ice and sliding into the road. It's a really good point. And someone shared a best practice. In other jurisdictions, France comes to mind, employers, public and private, are legally obligated to pay 50% of the cost of an employee transit pass for those employees that choose to get one. This helps to incentivize transit usage and also allows other stakeholders to contribute to the cost of maintaining the transit system, while also reducing money that is spent on maintaining, building expensive parking infrastructure. Paired with a student pass, this could potentially be a way to increase transit usage by many users. For example, MUNSU students, faculty, staff, government employees, student health, CNA, etc. Thank you for that. We also got a question from Rick. I don't know if this has been addressed because I couldn't be here for the first hour. We shouldn't be subsidizing parking spaces at MUN. We're encouraging driving when we should be doing the opposite. Worse, it's so cheap that people apply for them even if they don't really need them. It would be better to spend that money on subsidizing a U-Pass. Is there any hope of charging people a rational amount for parking to discourage driving? And I just wanted to say, I did the research for the Facebook event and had been looking at some numbers that were from 2017, and it seems that there have been some changes to increase the price of parking at MUN so that it isn't being subsidized by tuition and government funding. But I think maybe that's going to be kind of being rolled out, or I don't know if anyone, I know there was an increase in the price of parking last year, but yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that.
I can speak to it a little bit, and I think if I recall correctly, what I was told was that the Board of Regents vote was that there would be no more money spent on new parking until it became cost recovery, until the and I don't know if they got to the point of being cost recovery or not, but just to address that idea and about disincentivizing parking on campus and driving, I think that in the long run and in certain circumstances, that's absolutely a great idea. From the student perspective, why are we the ones? Why isn't that being done for everyone, right? And it's because we're already the lowest on the totem pole. We hardly have any potential parking spaces on campus, and where we do, like the one time I got into the lottery and got a parking pass, and it was over in the church parking lot across from the MHA on Elizabeth Avenue. That's close, sure, but when in the middle of winter, I'd rather try and take the bus or get dropped off. Anyways, but I just want to be conscious of that. Like, I think that we absolutely do need to find ways to start disincentivizing driving, but I feel like it's wrong. It's problematic to do that when you're not providing alternatives, and right now there aren't alternatives.
Yeah, I'm just gonna. We have a few more questions. So I'm gonna see if we can quickly answer them before our time is up. David asked, heard that $3 million has been allocated to improve access to transportation this year. I guess this is in the most recent budget. Is this continuing the subsidy for those on low incomes? Is it please, an ongoing commitment to helping with running costs? Could it help? I don't know if Sarah, you could speak to that.
Sure. My understanding, now I haven't gone into detail on that yet. My understanding is that that is to continue the bus pass for everyone, either the Metro bus or the Go bus pass for everyone on income support, which is 10,000 people, which will have an effect on much, Metro buses overall, give them 10,000 more riders to hopefully expand routes and stuff, but I don't know what the expansion of routes looks like. But again, so that budget amount is only up until March, from now to March. So working March onwards, we'll be having a new budget for next year. So I will certainly be fighting to keep that, funding amount for people on income support, and maybe students. I don't know. More discussions required.
Great, thank you so much, Sarah. And finally, was there data collected during this process in order to know how many students live outside the Metro student area?
So to come up with that information, and again, recognizing this is a moving conversation in the sense that the students we were modeling, the student population we were modeling on wouldn't necessarily be the student population who were there in 2 years' time. As Sarah said, that we had a lead time of almost 24 months from a decision. So whatever we decided, it was going to take us 2 years almost to implement. So Metrobus did do an analysis of student place of residence based on data provided to the registrar's office. There are some inherent challenges with that data because it depends on what a student identifies as their permanent place of residence. So they might be living somewhere for school and live permanently somewhere else. So we did the best we could with the information available. So Metrobus ran some information based on registrar's office data. And from that, we also did some modeling based on different opt-out percentages. And I don't recall now because it was a little while ago, but we had a baseline assumption of a number of opt-outs. And I think we were about 1 in 5 would qualify for an opt-out is kind of what we had assumed. But yes, there was some data collected, and I'm sure it could be available. Again, a lot of the information is still on that mun.ca/UPass website. So if anyone wants to look at videos of the consultation, the report, details about the proposal, a lot of information is still available. But I would suspect if this was going to be renewed in earnest, that you'd have to start some of that data collection. You certainly can use the data from 2017-18, but you'd need to look at enrollment again for 2019. And again, recognizing enrollment looks a little bit different now than it did before, given the situation. But hopefully that helps answer the question.
Thank you so much.
Sorry. I was going to ask if I could add one thought I had on that, and I just wanted to put it out there in case anyone has or can think of a solution to this that might be useful going forward. But one of the concerns I had or I wondered about at the time was if we have to go based off of the information that students provide to MUN to determine whether they're, say, in the opt-out area. I wondered, like, how would you prevent people from giving false addresses if they wanted to opt out, or and I don't know if you could. Maybe you have to come up with a whole new system. But I think that's also one of the kind of difficult or particularities to be thought about and considered for a new plan going forward.
Yeah, to Liam's point, there's a whole series of implementation challenges and opportunities that we never got quite to that stage. The administration of a fee, the opt-out process. We really looked at best and better practice across the country as to how they provided some of that validation, providing power bills as an example, and then we get into, well, what if I rent my property, etc. So it does become challenging, as Liam mentioned. We didn't have to get to that level with this one, but certainly we had started the process of thinking it through and the logistics. So it's pretty detailed and involved, as Liam mentioned.
All right, thank you. So unfortunately it is 8:30, so I'm going to wrap it up there. There are a few more questions, comments that people had. So it's great to see so much excitement or engagement on this. So hopefully we'll be able to maybe do another one or some kind of more maybe a town hall or key to having this conversation happening. So I do want to thank you all for joining us tonight, especially to our speakers for all the preparation and work that they put into this, our tech support for ensuring this event has gone so smoothly, and for our attendees for your great questions and comments. This has been a really helpful session to better understand the UPass vote, why it failed, and how we can move forward on this really important issue. If you do have any further thoughts you would like to share, we have put together this short survey that I have added to the chat and we'll share on our social media to get more insight into the program. We already have some responses, which is super exciting. And thank you to those who have taken the time to complete the survey. The Memorial University Climate Action Coalition is keen to implement the UPass in a way that accommodates the needs of students and potentially expand it to employees both on campus and in nearby employment hubs. And if anyone would like to get involved to help with that project, please send us a message on our Facebook or Twitter, or email us at admin@muncac.ca. We meet every Monday at 1 p.m. to check in and talk about our different projects, and we welcome all the university students, staff, faculty, and interested community members to attend. So that's all from me. Thank you all, and I hope you all have a good night.